What's good, my inquisitive and sometimes delightful anatomy heads? This is part 2 of my anatomy series, and let's talk about what we're going to get into this episode. So we're going to talk about planes of motion, expand upon those key terms we talked about in the last video, and we're just going to talk about the general regions of the body, but also general's too boring. We're going to go a step further. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is brush up on the last video. So remember, we talked about superior, inferior, lateral, medial, anterior, posterior. So you can combine those terms. So I'm going to put a dot right here, right? Or a little more to this side because it's on the right side of my body. So superolateral to this position is inferolateral, inferomedial, or anterolateral. It's on the front to the side, posteromedial on the back side of whatever given segment you have to the midline. Nice little fun fact. Most professors won't ask for that, but I think it's just important to know. All right, so now we're going to talk about body regions. There's a few of them. So the first one is obviously the head, number one. Second one is the neck or cervical region, right? Then the next is a thorax, and that starts right here where the clavicle is, and it goes all the way down to the rib cage, or where the rib cage kind of ends, on the front and on the back. It goes a little further down the back. Then you have the abdominal region, pelvic region. Then you got your upper extremities and your lower extremities. We can take this all a step further. Let's think about the arm, right? Or the upper extremity, right? When you say arm, or if they ask you for it on a test, this would be wrong, right? The arm is here, right? All the way up to here. It's just a humerus bone, right? Which is this bone right here. You could say upper arm or whatever. That's cool. I use that. Everyone uses it. But on an exam, if they ask for arm, this is the arm. This is the forearm. And this is the hand. Not wrist, the hand. Because the wrist is a joint. The hand is just this general area, right? Same thing happens to the leg. We'll say this over here is the leg. That's technically wrong. On an exam, it would have to be thigh. So the femur bone, thigh bone. When they mention leg, they're talking about this here. Again, some people will say lower leg. I'm guilty of it a lot of times too, and I kind of do say it. But in terms of like an exam or being super specific, thigh, leg, and then foot. Almost lost my balance there. All right, so one thing I want to address too is we have abdominal, right? But what about the same region on the back? What do we call that? Is that the thorax? Well, yes and no, right? So let's look at the spine, right? You have 7 cervical vertebrae, right? We'll stop here. After that, the thoracic region starts. You have 12 of those vertebrae. So it'll be here to roughly about here. So you have mid-thoracic, upper thoracic, lower thoracic, and it's just a way for you to be a little more technical, right? I think it just makes more sense. But as I mentioned earlier, right? Abdominal region, the exact opposite of that, the lumbar region, or the lower back, and that has 5 vertebrae. So let's bring it back. Cervical, 7, thoracic, 12, lumbar, 5 vertebrae. If you want to remember that, think about 7 a.m. breakfast, 12 p.m. lunch, 5 p.m. early as dinner. All right, so now we're going to talk about planes of motion. And I think this is really important to learn and understand. We're going to mention 3. We'll talk about the big 3. Kind of an official 4th, but you'll see what I'm talking about. So the first one is called the sagittal plane. And in general, sagittal movement is just movement forwards and back, strictly forwards and back, right? I want you to pretend that there's a pane of glass. We divide this body into an equal left and an equal right. Well, other way around, right? Anything that breaks this glass is not a sagittal movement. So if you bitch slap somebody, like Will Smith, you broke the sagittal plane. But if you bowling, you're at a bar and you're throwing darts, or you punch somebody, all that is good and fine in the world of the sagittal plane. And you know what's another fun fact? If we look at the last video, let's look at the skull, the sagittal suture, what does it do? It divides the skull into an equal left and right, just like the sagittal plane, right? Boom. This line in the middle, if you want to be more specific, you probably don't, but if you do, here it is. It's called the mid-sagittal plane, right? Boom. perfectly divided to the left and right. But if there's a line right here or here, a little past the middle, it's just called parasagittal plane, right? All that is just next to the middle, right? Next to the midline. That's all para means. Here's another example. So you got your spine. These muscles right here are called your paraspinal muscles alongside the spine. You go a little higher, right? Up here, parascapular muscles in between or next to your scapular bones, right? Para just means next to. So mid-sagittal, parasagittal, right? Cool little fun fact. Our second plane is called the frontal plane, and that permits lateral and medial movement, left and right movement. It also divides our body into an equal front and an equal back half, right? So forward movement, break the frontal plane. You twist, anything like that, you broke that frontal plane. You throw a little kick, you're in that frontal plane. You sidestep, in the frontal plane. Another cool little fun fact, if you watch the last video I made, just like I mentioned with the sagittal plane, you have the coronal suture, right? Boom, divides the skull into a front and a back. Another name for the frontal plane is the coronal plane. See, everything's coming full circle. That's kind of cool, right? All right, moving on to our third plane of motion. This is the transverse plane or horizontal plane. So picture I have pane of glass divided me like that. It can only be rotational movements. So if you're a former intercontinental all-city hula hoop champ, you live in that horizontal plane, that transverse plane, right? Any motion like that, boom. Assume anatomical position, shoulder rotation, the wrist rotation, well, pronation, supination, that's all within the horizontal plane, right? It follows those rules. But the moment you do this, you do that, you break that plane. And our fourth unofficial plane of motion is called the scapular plane. So our shoulder blades, also known as the scapular bones, they don't sit perfectly flush to your back. They're curved in a little bit. They're curved in about 30 to 45 degrees, you know, depending on the person. So let's think about it. 30 to 45 degrees from the frontal plane, boom. Even, we're at 0, that's 90. Half of that, 45. So from here to here, that's the scapular plane. And it's imperative, especially for people who have issues with their shoulders when performing exercises, like anything like shoulder presses or lateral raises. Instead of doing it here where it's pretty uncomfortable, a little bit in front, all of a sudden it's more comfortable. All of a sudden it's more comfortable and you're more powerful in this position, shoulder pressing, than this position. It just is what it is. Another little fun fact in regards to these planes of motions, right? When you have imaging done for, like, let's say the brain, right? A sagittal imaging, right, would show a left and right. Frontal or coronal imaging will show front and back. And the transverse, remember, horizontal, will show like slices from a top-down view, right? So I think that's pretty cool, and you can see how it's relevant to our day-to-day lives, just regardless of motions, right? Just positions, right? So that's pretty much it, guys. This is the regions of the body, touching upon terms from the last video, and planes of motion. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so I can keep bringing you juicy anatomy content. And keep learning your anatomy, understand your body, and mind your business. Peace.